am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got Paul Goeringer back in the house from Maryland. Paul, why don't you reintroduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you, where are you, and what do you do?
Well, I'm glad to be back, Cari. My name's Paul Goeringer. I work at the University of Maryland. I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics. And I do research, teaching, and extension. The bulk of my work is doing extension outreach focused on agricultural law to producers in Maryland and sometimes in Delaware.
So I'm Paul, I'm a little curious about your story. I'm like, what attracted you to be an agricultural lawyer?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma and decided as I was going through law school, I did my undergrad at Oklahoma State and knew I wanted to go to law school eventually. And so I was working my way through law school. I thought, well, I understand how farms operate, so maybe I could become an agricultural lawyer and work in a small town. And then I realized I didn't actually want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a faculty member on campus somewhere, and ended up here.
So what do you love most about your position there in Maryland and working with ag producers?
So what I like the most, and it would be the thing that producers hate the most here, is this state has done a lot towards environmental regulation to help protect the bay. So it's a lot of trying to figure out environmental laws to better help producers understand them and work with them. And a lot of it is that I love every day is I do not deal with the same problem day in, day out. There's always something new that walks in my door and calls me with questions. And it's always fun to have to think about things differently or actually put on my lawyer hat and attempt to think of how would I handle this if I was in private practice and try to work my way through all of those issues.
So I'm curious, from my chair as a practicing attorney, I have a lot of clients who do deals on a handshake, right? They don't put contracts in writing. What do you think can be done to help ag producers put more contracts in writing?
So we've tried this with leases, and leases are still highly handshake deals here where no one wants to fill out a piece of paper. We put together forms for them to fill out, to just put numbers in and put their names in and put the basic information in. That has helped some. It seems like that's been the biggest help to get people to do it. But I think there are people that are just always going to want to do it on a handshake deal because they think nobody's ever going to fail miserably, to live up to their end, and it just happens. I mean, I've seen some recently where, they put it in writing, but one sentence stated they got this much notice to terminate the lease. The sentence after it said, and actually we can do it in 30 days. So then it's like, what do you actually do in that case? You did what I asked you to do, put it in writing, but you didn't pay attention and you didn't get somebody to review it for you. So there's problems. We run into that a lot. Even though I can get them to do it, there's still mistakes made, but they're better than handshake deals.
Yeah, it's hard for me, Paul, because I feel like I get the calls when things go wrong. And then the very first question that I ask them is like, well, do you have a contract? And then usually, almost always, the answer is no. And it makes it very difficult. And I feel like a lot of agriculture producers are doing business with people that they know, like, and trust, which is fantastic. But just because you put something in writing doesn't mean that you don't know, like, and trust them. It's just a memorialization of the agreement, clarification. So.
Oh, in a lot of those cases I talked to, I was like, what happens if one of you dies? Is that person's kids going to understand what you two agreed upon? Are they going to have the same faith and trust in you as mom or dad did? Like, you got to take that into consideration. Or this leads, I've had, yeah, nobody ever calls me when things are going right. It's always when things have gone south, I get calls, and then it becomes the fun of trying to figure out how to help them within the bounds that I can help.
Yes, it's so much better for me to be lawyering as a preventative medicine and drafting the farm leases than dealing with things after the fact. And like, you hit the nail on the head, like somebody can die. And then where are you? You think you've had a lease on this land for 50 years, but that doesn't mean you're going to continue to lease it if things aren't memorialized correctly.
Yeah.
All right, Paul, we're going to talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, which is mediation, or specifically the Agriculture Mediation Program. And correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but it is funded, at least in part, from the USDA. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, Paul, a couple of years ago, when I looked into this program, it was not in all 50 states, but it was in nearly all 50 states. I want to say something around 42, 44, something along those lines. I don't know what the current statistics are. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I think it's right around there. I can't remember off the top of my head how many states it is right now, but yeah, it's not all of them, because I know, like, here, I know we have it, Maryland has it, Pennsylvania has it, I think Virginia has it, but Delaware does not. So,
oh, interesting. So it's in New York and in New Jersey, where I am on the rosters, and it's also here in Illinois, where I sit as well. So tell our listeners, what is the Agriculture Mediation Program?
So this is a program that USDA created. I think initially, my understanding is they were designed to help producers mediate disputes between the USDA agencies, such as if you had a dispute with Farm Service Agency, you could walk in and they would at least work with you, and they're neutral parties because they're just funded through USDA. They're typically through state departments of ag, or sometimes a land grant university. I think that's usually the two big areas. I know Pennsylvania is through Penn State, but we're through the Department of Ag here. And I'm assuming New Jersey and New York are through the Department of Ag too, if I remember correctly.
Now, in New York, New Jersey, and in Illinois, the program supports two kinds of mediation against USDA for federal farm programs, but also right to farm disputes. Does Maryland also cover right to farm disputes?
We do, because our right to farm law is, I think New York's the only other weird one like this. We do not let you go to court first. You don't ever get to go to court. You get to go to mediation first. So you're either mediated between the ag mediators through the program, or the county set up a separate program to mediate it. And almost always, from talking to the mediation director here, you go through the ag mediation program because nobody in the county understands how to mediate. So they almost always bring in the county or the state mediation program to do it. So yeah, those are allowed here. And I believe it's allowed in Pennsylvania too.
So Paul, I know, like, when I was in New York, there was some chatter about potentially expanding it to farm estate and succession planning, which I don't think that ever got done. Are you aware of any state agriculture mediation program that is expanded outside of really those two areas, federal farm program and right to farm?
So that's a good question. It did expand. The 2018 Farm Bill sort of opened them up more to what they could do, because the way the mediation programs were limited initially was, when the program came out, whatever USDA had set in the Farm Bill, or whatever Congress had set in the Farm Bill, that's where the program stayed. So now it's been expanded to include estate planning, which sometimes in most of these, and you probably do a lot of estate plans, Cari, sometimes you really do need a mediator in there, not because the parties are going to fight, but just to get them to talk and at least have an adult conversation. So it's not mom and dad talking down to kids, it's everybody talking as equals. And in those cases.
Yeah, Paul, so I do a lot of estate planning. And I also am dealing with probates too, where, there was a real lack of conversation as a family for decades. And I really, really wish more multi-generational farm families would get a mediator involved, the mediator wouldn't necessarily be drafting up the estate plan, but would talk about, how are we going to move this farm from one generation to the next? How do you see mediators being involved in those kind of conversations?
And that's exactly how I see them get involved. Is look at just sitting down with folks and having that tough conversation. So there's at least somebody forcing them to have the conversation and do it to where there's not, we don't break down into our various silos and try to do it. In fact, when we do estate planning and succession planning workshops here, the ag mediator program director is usually the first person I call to see if she's available, because it's always good to have her on the agenda to talk about the program and explain how it fits into estate planning. Because as I tell them, we go through a lot of stuff throughout the day: communications, mediation, business planning. And then at the very end, they get to hear about the tools used in it. And a lot of it's like, the tools are easy. Any lawyer can figure out how to make your plan work. It's not about you understanding the tool. You're not going to walk into the lawyer's office and say, I need a trust. The lawyer is going to help you figure out you need a trust. This is the way this is going to work. You don't need to know the tools. The lawyer will work with you. You just need an understanding of the tools. But you need to do all this other background research before you go in, because the lawyer is not going to want to waste time having to figure this out for you. Your bill is going to be so much cheaper if you walk in with the business plan and everybody fits in and you've already done the mediation. And it's going to be the perfect client to walk into Cari's office.
Yeah, exactly. So to break down these various kinds of mediation, starting with the federal farm program, so what does that look like, for example? Like, can you give some examples of maybe some disputes that a producer might have with, FSA or another USDA agency?
Yeah, so the biggest disputes would be, you went in, you thought you qualified for a program, you filled out the paperwork, the county committee figured out you didn't actually apply or qualify, so they want money back. So you could go in and mediate over those type of disputes. Some of the bigger ones they get involved into are where wetland, and it's probably a bigger deal in Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, or not Ohio, Iowa, wetlands delineations in some of the prairie pothole areas where we have these wetlands that periodically show up every now and again, and they might have the soils that say they're wetlands, but they may not ever have water standing in them. So they can help a lot with that, because USDA sometimes takes a while on those delineations, and people do fight over how that can be laid out, because that can impact farmland and how much farmland can actually go in. So it's a lot of adverse decisions by USDA. So if the USDA makes an adverse decision, whether with an FSA or NRCS, they can go in. There's also some where if you're denied a claim under crop insurance, you can go in and in some cases mediate under that, but it also depends on the policy. In a lot of cases, you're going to go through another alternative dispute resolution process. You're probably going to go through arbitration and not actually get to go through mediation. Both the company and the producer have to sign off on mediation with crop insurance claims.
How does a producer or a party, maybe they're just a loan applicant, commence mediation if they are interested in it?
So typically in most states, it's just you've got to contact the mediation program, and they'll do an intake form, figure out how they can help you, and reach out to the other party. And the other party, again, has to agree to go through it, and hopefully it will work. So that's usually the biggest way to get it started, here at least.
And what about those producers that are listening and being like, well, this makes no sense. These mediators who are supposedly neutral are participating in this USDA mediation program. They're just hired hands, for the USDA. How do I really know that this person's going to be neutral?
Yeah, USDA has no control over these mediators. In most cases, they have no idea who the mediators are usually. They're going through whoever's running the state program. So they'll either be, trained mediators that have signed up with the departments of ag to go through and just be assigned cases periodically. So you'll just be assigned one that comes in if you're in the area, or something you can say. I know I help each year with our mediator training to help give them a background on ag law usually, and some of the other things that go on within that may not always be things they're going to mediate on, but like developing topics they should be aware of and stuff like that. So I know that's the biggest area. Is they're not really connected to USDA. Yeah, it's funded by USDA, but typically it's this other entity that will hopefully take away some of that bias that they could feel.
And in shifting to that second type of mediation, the right to farm mediation, can you give us an example of what that would look like? What are the kinds of disputes that might end up in that kind of mediation?
I mean, yeah, it could be anything from, say, the producer is applying nutrients and the homeowner next door doesn't understand what's going on and it impacts some use. Like they may want to have a party, they may want to have something and now they can't because of this. And so we could come in and mediate sort of just on when nutrient applications are going to take place and the type of notice the farmer needs to give the neighbor just so they're aware. So then the homeowner can schedule stuff around that. It also may be with poultry, and that's one of our biggest areas here is just sort of mediating some of the disputes that people have issues with maybe smells coming from the farm or dairy having smells. So what do we have to do? The best example I have from the previous administrator here was one of the biggest issues they ever had to mediate was a farmer came through town with his manure spreader and wouldn't tighten one thing down and it was just leaving a trail through town. So they had to come in and mediate the route the farmer would take to avoid going down Main Street, to avoid the problems of creating a manure smell through the town and working to understand like, oh, this is why I need to make sure this is tightened down so nothing's actually leaking out of the back. So there's a lot of it's mainly just the nuisance issues that can come up with farms and end up getting mediated.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for people to understand that the right to farm is a defense. Mm-hmm. It's not a sword. So, you bring up the good point. Like somebody has a nuisance claim and then the farmer might have a right to farm defense. That's kind of some scenario that would be potentially mediated. I'd also like to note that these mediations, especially with right to farm, might not be covered in one session. Mm-hmm. I was a mediator once for a right to farm dispute that lasted 5 different sessions. And so, just for people to keep an open mind that like it might take a while to work through some of these more complicated challenges.
And you bring up a good point. They may take multiple sessions, but if you're working through the program, it's free. Where if you are doing this on your own, you've got to pay the mediator to come in each time. You got to pay an hourly rate, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to do it. But the mediator's, getting paid through this state program.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal that this is a free program for producers. I mean, I really feel like this program is underutilized. And I'm not sure that whether or not producers are just not aware that it exists. And it's not just the producers, it's also maybe a complaining party, in a right to farm nuisance type of a situation. But I definitely am a huge fan of the program and think that more people need to utilize it.
Yeah. I send almost everybody that comes in with a dispute to them first, because almost all of the disputes that come to me are simple things that a mediator can help you work out. Yeah. And you don't need an attorney yet.
Even though the mediation program is free for producers, as a mediator myself who's on the roster, I do want to note that the mediator does actually get paid. Not enough, but they do get paid. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to also note that, and that it's not a requirement to be an attorney to be a mediator. For our listeners, Paul, that are thinking to themselves, like, what exactly is mediation? How is it different than arbitration? Like, why shouldn't I just go to court? Like, how would you define like what like mediation is or what it's not?
So I would say what mediation is, and since you do more of this than I do at times, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Mediation is where you're going to sit down with a neutral party, both you and the other party. They're not going to take a side. The mediator is never going to take a side. Their job is just to kind of get you guys to talk and kind of work to a common resolution to the problem. Arbitration, you're going to sit down with a panel. It's going to operate kind of like a court proceeding would. There'll be rules of evidence and rules that you can put forward. You'll have witnesses you can bring forward. So it's not really coming up with a resolution. The arbitrators are going to figure out in the end what they think the resolution should be. it may not always be fair to both parties. It may take, it's just going to depend on what the arbitrators think. In court, you're going to go to court. And as I explained to people, courts are set with doctrines that are based around either equity or something else. And what we can do within court may not always be the outcome you want. Judges don't have magic powers to make everything work out right. They have certain rules they have to work through to come to resolution. So it may not always be the best resolution for the parties. So mediation at least gets you to figure out what you think the best mediation or the resolution would be and work towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, statistics will show that when people are able to come up with their own agreement, as opposed to a third party, whether it's an arbitrator or a judge just ordering something, then the people are more likely to comply with the terms of the agreement. It doesn't do anybody any good if people aren't going to comply to the terms of what they're supposed to be doing.
That's a good point. And the costs are going to be a whole lot less with mediation than with any of the other two, because with the other two, you're probably going to have an attorney. You can still have an attorney with mediation. And it's probably in some cases a good idea to have an attorney, but you don't always have to have one, and you can kind of work through some resolution with less cost if you don't have the money for the attorney.
Well, even though the agriculture mediation program might not cover other kinds of mediation, such as contract disputes, farm divorce, mediation, farm business divorce mediation, et cetera. I certainly hope our listeners will consider, exploring there may be a potential community mediation center or a privately retained mediator to help them with that dispute.
Yeah, there's always other options outside the program that can, and I at least know here too, the program will help you in any of those disputes. It just may start costing you a little bit of money to work with the mediators at that point. You may get billed for it at the end, but it's usually at a lower cost than what it would be going along.
Paul, we're recording this February 2022. We're nearly 2 years into a pandemic now. So I'm curious, Paul, what have been, I think, for you, your biggest challenges as a extension educator and working in ag law? And then what has been the biggest silver lining for you during the COVID pandemic?
Okay, that's a good question. So the biggest challenge is for the first 18 months of this, really, it's only been here recently we've started doing in-person meetings again. It was talking to producers and figuring out what problems are. Because I was learning what I needed to develop my programs around based off talking to them at meetings in person. And we did a lot of Zoom meetings, but you didn't get that connection with people because, you can go on the chat, but it's not the same. And you may not understand how the chat box works. So it just never worked out. So that was in a group with some extension economists from other regions. And that was one of our biggest things we talked about, was just we didn't have that connection. So it didn't help our programs figure out where we were going next, because we really can't just make it up. We kind of got to know what producers are having issues and where they go. And the biggest silver lining was I've gotten a lot of work done not having to travel over the past 18 months. And now it's picking back up again, where I'm remembering oh yeah, this is what catching up on all my email after 3 days of travel looks like. It was so nice to be caught up with email and actually get work done and not be on airplanes as much and not be in cars as much and just relax at home and take it easy.
Absolutely. Speaking of travel, I am going to attempt, keyword attempt, to make it to the AALA meeting this fall. I believe it's in New Orleans, right?
Yes, it is in New Orleans. I can't remember the dates, but it's in New Orleans in November.
So I have a baby. So I am planning tentatively on going to AALA with my baby and a nanny.
Fun.
So this will be a whole new adventure for me to figure out how to navigate, being a working lawyer who travels with a child in the middle of a pandemic. So, we'll figure it out.
That'll be fun. And the hotel's in a nice, quiet area, it seems like, from walking by. It's not too close to Bourbon Street. It's at least a ways off, so it'll be quiet.
I love the piano bar there. I forgot the name of it, but it's calling my name. Paul, so tell our listeners, how can they contact you if they have any questions about the agriculture mediation program or agricultural laws in Maryland?
Yeah, so if you have questions, you can email me at lgoering@umd.edu. And I'm on Twitter and other social media at AgLawPaul, so you can find me there too. It's probably the easiest two ways to get in touch with me because I never answer my phone sometimes.
Yes, tweet him. All right, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and coming back to the podcast.
No problem. Thank you, Cari.